Chairman.
Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where a bill goes through a good process, you tend to get good legislation, and I think that this has been a good process, even though it's been a truncated one, and in the end we've got a good bill. The submissions, Mr. Chairman, I thought were particularly well focused, as they tend to be when you get a truncated process, and many added a valued perspective and some really quite useful suggestions. All parties, Mr. Chairman, work very well together on the Local Government and Environment Select Committee, so that after a lot of hard work, I might say, consensus was reached on virtually all of the changes to the bill. And that was very ably assisted by Scott Simpson's very capable chairmanship, and I don't think the consensus would have been so easy without that. Mr. Chairman, I also want to express my appreciation of Minister Brownlee's willingness on this occasion to listen, to discuss in person, and to accommodate changes the opposition parties had sought. But my special thanks go to the officials and to the support staff, whose really hard work late at night is very sincerely appreciated, I'm sure, by all of us. Mr. Chairman, going into the consideration of this bill, New Zealand First did have 3 areas of concern. These have now been addressed in the SOP changes that we have before us. The first of those which I raised was the purpose clause, which clearly did need some work and needed some clarification, especially around the need to facilitate the restoration of the environment as far as practically possible in the circumstances, of course, and a new clause was added for that purpose. I'm relieved actually that no attempt was made to define what we mean by the term environment, because I think these days that's clear enough. Mr. Chairman, the clause also covers economic recovery, planning and rebuilding, and the economic, social and cultural well-being of communities. And the expression of purposes in the bill is actually very important, because it's referred to in other provisions in the bill relating to the scope of the powers under the bill and their checks and balances. The second issue that we thought was important was clause 16, which has now been deleted and replaced with something else. But that related firstly to the addition of new council districts and regions, and that will now no longer be possible without new legislation. And that's appropriate when you bear in mind that the definition of the term earthquake-affected area in C of that definition includes other districts or regions that contain transport or other infrastructure. And that means you could actually go quite some distance beyond the defined areas covered by the bill, provided it relates to effects on transport and infrastructure. So it's actually quite a wide-ranging area for the bill. Mr. Chairman, this is not generic legislation, and the areas actually covered by it are already vast. So it's appropriate that new legislation should be obtained if significant events or effects arrive later in other areas outside those listed in the bill. So I think that we've done the right thing with regard to this piece of legislation as far as the addition of other districts or regions are concerned, which will require new legislation. The second issue was that other acts, in addition to those listed in Schedule 2, which already contains more than 40 enactments, cannot be added to except if there is near consensus of all political parties obtained. I think that was a very good compromise which was suggested by Minister Brownlee and was readily adopted by the committee. The third issue, Mr. Chairman, was the limitation on appeal rights. And we had expressed concerns, as other parties had, about how broad Clause 8.3 appeared to be. That's been addressed pretty well, I think, by a new Clause 8.4, which has been added so that it's clear that the courts are not prevented from determining whether an order is authorised by the Act, Mr Chairman.
Dennis O'Rourke.
I only have a few more comments to make, actually, because those are the three main areas which New Zealand First had concern about. As I've said, they've all been addressed and properly addressed in the amendments that we see before us in the SOP. There were a number of other worthwhile changes made, however, which New Zealand First also supported, especially around the all-important panel to review and advise the Minister, because that, I think, is one of the, in fact, is the most important of the checks and balances provided for in the bill. And it was important to get that right. I think we now do have it right. So, Mr Chairman, with all those changes, New Zealand First is now very satisfied with the bill. We seek no other changes and will vote in favour.
Stuart.